Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Webster. I'm the founder, CEO, and CISO for Cyvergence. Today, we're going to discuss third-party risk management. It is the second part of an ongoing series. So let's take a look at what we're going to learn today. So we're going to cover attack surface management, how it fits into third-party risk. We're going to cover dark web and how it's applied to third-party risk management. And we're also going to cover how to assess third-party software risks for software that is not purchased. So the sections are dark web and external attack surface management, software assessments, and we'll touch very briefly on the services. So a bit of housekeeping. This is part of an ongoing series. There's more topics on the way. I do assume that you have some cybersecurity knowledge. You don't have to be an expert, but at least have a little bit. This is not textbook knowledge and just based on real world experience, a lot of it today. And your mileage may vary. Don't assume that just because we're recommending or talking about it here, that it's right for your organization. It may not be the right thing to do. So let's jump into the dark web and attack surface management. So there's a lot of softwares out there that do cover external attack surface management. Think of it a little bit for those who have seen the threat and vulnerability series, kind of like a vulnerability assessment scan for the outside of an organization. But it is more than just a external scan because those are covering usually what I like to refer to, and there's exceptions to this, of infrastructure vulnerabilities. But it does cover some application vulnerabilities that are common in organizations as well. So what it does, it creates kind of a external risk profile based on the vulnerability to try to determine where you're at in terms of your security. It does include a little bit of application vulnerabilities as well. It can talk about what the algorithms are for encryption. There's a lot of things that it's going to be covering. And what they do is they remove a lot of the subjectivity that's there. So you're not based on like an answer. Like last time, the first one, we talked about the questionnaires. And the questionnaires are a little bit subjective because you're trying to see, well, how mature am I? Where am I at? What's this look like? So what they do is they provide a letter grade. If you have no external issues, you're going to get an A. There's some exceptions to that because there are definitely some challenges when it comes to attack surface management. But at least it gets you to start to think about it in the right way. So sometimes they're a little bit slow on remediating, but at least it's a good place to start. And you can say, hey, we've covered all these vulnerabilities. Because sometimes they're very quick, depending on the vendor that you're using, sometimes a little bit slower. Sometimes they're independent scanners that are being built. So there are some software companies out there that use the equivalent of attack surface management as part of their third-party program, and that's being used. And they make sense from a lot of perspectives as well, because what they're able to do is do those extra level scanning, and it automates the tasks. You don't have to manually go through and take a look at it and say, does this company meet my risk profile or not? It's done automatically. You see where the major issues are. Now, because it is entered into the third-party risk space a lot, it is helping to remediate a lot of these different issues. So I think we're headed in a very good direction here with this, and I think that it's a very valuable part of it. The other thing that's great about the external attack surface management is sometimes especially if you need to look at things on a continual basis, you don't know exactly what's going on, and they don't want to answer a questionnaire once a year. So this is something that can go on, you can scan it on a daily basis or a monthly basis to pull up new information. And then you can go ahead and analyze and say, is this company trending in a good direction or a bad direction? You can scan it based on what's important to your organization. So if it's something that you want to look at on a one and done basis, you're going to be good. The other thing too, a lot of these third-party risk programs that are based on external attack surface management is they're being done for multiple companies. So you might, have to remediate it, and when they go through and get the finding, but it remediates it across the board. So you're telling a whole bunch of different companies what the individual issues are. But at any rate, this is just a very quick overview of attack surface management. You're essentially looking for weaknesses in the infrastructure. So now let's dive into dark web monitoring. This is something that is fantastic. There are a lot of companies, what they do is they'll go in, they'll join these dark web groups. They'll look at the hacking groups, determine what the issues are. And sometimes what they do as well is they'll not only join the group, but they'll determine if the actors are targeting an organization or if there's a particular vulnerability that's out there. There's some open sites that people are aware of, like Shodan, that can do a form of dark web monitoring where they find a vulnerability that's out there. But also they can search the marketplace. Dark web is a marketplace, whether we like to think of it that way or not. And so what it can do is find out, is there an exploit that's being sold on the dark web that another threat actor could use to log in and gain access to the systems? Now, one of the things that I have found about dark web monitoring, and I know the tools that have been out there, they'll sometimes go back years. And so I've seen it where I've been contacted by different groups and said, hey, looks like we found the system here that's already compromised. Are you going to do something about it? And you go back and look at it from, 7 years ago. It may have been true at the time, but you don't see any evidence of that now. And so that's a challenge when you're working with some of the dark web tools. Just kind of keep in mind that they sometimes are a little more dated, but it's all part of the challenge that companies are facing when it comes to dark web monitoring, whether you're using it yourself or other companies are using it against you to try to determine how safe is the data if they decide to put it in there. It is a great place to get started for a lot of companies. I do think that it's a good thing to consider. Um, but just keep that in the back of your mind. It definitely is a good thing, and especially if you want to find out if organizations are in your environment already, that's where you can get an alert. And I think that these things have an extraordinary amount of value. So I talked a little bit about the advantages already, the external attack surface management, and the dark web. But sometimes you do have slow resolution of findings on both, and that's something that is important. The other thing too that I think is great is just, I'll reemphasize this again, you get rid of the human bias. You're finding stuff that is actually there, especially with the external attack surface management. And is it going to be a true or a false in terms of that? Well, it's not a judgment call. It's there, it's tested, you know that you've got an issue. So let's go ahead and move to software assessments. This is for like non-purchase software. If you're going through and doing a purchase of a software, quite often you have especially if you have to pay for it, you have people giving a demonstration of it, saying what the capabilities are. Usually you can bring in a third-party risk questionnaire to find out how secure the software is. And that's going to be part of that overall challenge for an organization. But and sometimes if you're buying it like an app on a phone, you don't have the ability to go through and check it and provide those types of questionnaires. This is something you download, you install, and you're kind of like, well, I guess it's okay. But there's a lot more that you can do. It isn't like you're stuck once you like, oh, I guess I want to download it and find out what the issues are. So you can't use, in many cases, external attack surface management. In some cases, that's true. Some cases that isn't, but it's another way that you can approach it, assuming that they've got some sort of web presence somewhere other than maybe a website. It gives you information. Sometimes, because there's such a huge proliferation of these applications that are out there, sometimes there's very little information on the dark web. Sometimes there's a lot. Sometimes the applications are being built for the sole purpose of gathering information off of your phone. There's a lot of malware that's out there, and that's where some of these challenges are with the software. You can also check the National Vulnerability Database. You go take a look at the CVEs, Common Vulnerability Exposures. That's something I talked about in the Threat and Vulnerability series. But it's just part of the process. In a lot of cases, you don't know if you're downloading the right software, especially if you're talking about open source software that you're including in your application development process. So you can use different types of tools that are out there. There's software composition analysis that you're seeing here. But also ask yourself, well, what kind of data is it going to be handling? If it's going to handle no data and you're just going to do a couple things, it may not be a big risk for your organization. You have to look at and understand the risk. What is the business value? What's the business risk? That's how I like to look at it for these or the other thing I would like to do, is it manageable? Can the operations organization actually manage the software if it's part of what's going on? If they can't, that's an issue, because then it becomes an unmanaged piece of software in your organization, and being able to manage things appropriately is the right way to go. The other thing to do is look for red flags in the design. Do they have any issues? So over on the right-hand side, I've got a few examples here. If they're rarely updated, that's an issue. There's very few downloads, that can be an issue. But Some of the software that's out there, they can have thousands of downloads and it still is meant to be problematic. That's just part of the problem. If they have a lot of CVEs, you know, that's an issue, especially if you combine it with rarely being updated and a lot of CVEs, you have a potential for serious problems there. You can take a look at no encryption or no secure connectivity with it to find out exactly what's going on. And all these types of problems you're going to find with different pieces of software. Another thing I didn't put in here as well is artificial intelligence, especially when you're considering the download of open source software to integrate into your software environment. That can create another challenge too, because maybe it's connecting into artificial intelligence. And so it's providing a stream of information to other organizations. That can be true whether it's AI or it could be a maliciously designed application. So I know GitHub just recently had an issue where people were creating all these false softwares that were out there for the purpose of having people maliciously download the software and include it in what's going on. So there's a lot of things you can do. You're not just stuck just because you can't do the traditional approaches we've talked about. These are some of the methods I would recommend. You can also put it into a safe area to test it to make sure that things are okay. But overall, these are some of the processes that you can use. So a bit about the Cyvergent services. We can take on your third-party risk management assessments and program building, virtual CISO as well. But let me know if there's anything that you need. Feel free to have a conversation. This is just the start of the third-party risk series that we're covering. And I want to thank you very much for being here. Feel free to like us if you want, put us on YouTube, let us know what you think, go to LinkedIn and so on. But thank you very much for being here. I appreciate your time. Bye-bye.